to improve the level of consistency, efficiency, and predictability in how the city administers the design review program, to set clear expectations for everyone involved, and to support communication and dialogue among the various stakeholders in the design review process. So there are sort of 4 general buckets of recommendations that you may be aware of. The first is a new requirement that applicants going through the design review process conduct community outreach to the areas around the projects that they're proposing before beginning the city's design review program. This new proposal would be required in addition to any existing requirements for public notice or public comment opportunities. And there would be a sort of a special emphasis in areas of the city where there may be equity concerns to do additional customization of the outreach as well to reach those underserved audiences. The purpose of that outreach would be to, again, to improve the dialogue between the applicant and the communities around the projects, and to improve the applicant's understanding of the local context. Some of the other changes address the thresholds for what types of projects go through design review. So one of the goals is to simplify those. Right now they're different zone by zone throughout the city. There are a lot of different types of thresholds, and they also take into consideration the number of units as well as the square footage of the project. We're also proposing to, in some zones, raise the thresholds and to eliminate the existing streamlined design review process. Alongside the square footage thresholds changes, we're proposing new consideration for the complexity of a project, and there are a series of criteria that would designate a project as being complex, and then there would be sort of like a different type of design review those projects would go through. We're also including more commercial development and institutional development in industrial areas in the program that right now would be exempt from design review, as well as a few more types of institutional uses as well that are currently exempt. So right now there's the kind of full board design review process, and then an administrative process and a streamlined process. While we're cutting the streamlined design review process, we're proposing to add a new, what we're calling a hybrid process, where one stage of the review would be handled by SDCI planning staff, land use staff, and the other phase would be handled by the design review boards. And so it's kind of a hybrid of the administrative process we have now and the full board process, and that would be used under our proposal for smaller projects that have one of those complexity characteristics, or for larger projects that do not have any of those characteristics. We have a pilot program option where, depending on whether you opt into the pilot, which stage of the process goes to the board versus goes to the staff planner. And then we're also shifting more projects to the administrative design review process, where SECI staff planner handles the full review. All the same steps happen, but it's done in-house by one of our planning staff. And that would only be used for the very smaller projects that are not very complex. And that would also be the default option for projects that are funded by the city for affordable housing. And then the last category of just other types of sort of small changes we're making some minor changes to the board composition, sort of who makes up the board members. We're proposing some meeting limits that would apply to certain types of projects. Not part of the direct kind of ordinance, but separately, we're going to be making some technology improvements to improve noticing and commenting opportunities. We're considering revising the meeting formats for some of the board meetings, providing additional training toward board members and our staff, looking into doing audio recordings of meetings, changing some of the procedures for reviewing exceptional trees through design review, and then also making some changes to minor communication facilities as well. And so that really kind of covers the full breadth. Not a lot of detail on that, but again, those 2 previous plus briefings go into more specificity.
Thank you, Christine. We have about 40 folks that have signed up to give public comment on this topic. Considering that we have the room until right about 10 o'clock, I'm I'm going to say we'll give everybody the 2 minutes. I think that some of the folks that have signed up may have already left, but why don't we go ahead and get started. The first person who signed up is Alex Zimmerman. He does not appear to still be here. Alex, are you here? I hope you don't have his number. Brooke Broad. Brooke, are you still here? Brooke, you're going to be followed by Aaron House and then Joyce Glasgow.
Great. Hello. I am here to speak in favor of a simplified design review process. We need to remove needless obstacles to creating more housing and reduce the amount of process in general that we love so much here in Seattle. That said, I do have some concerns about the proposed process for community engagement. I really do like the changes that will make community engagement happen on the front end as opposed to the back end when most projects are too far along to really take input. But as somebody who works in community engagement as a profession, I fear the proposals are really not going to result in a truly improved dialogue between the community and applicants. Merely dropping flyers at a coffee shop, one of the examples, or sending a mail in a 2-block radius of a proposed project really isn't going to result in deep, broad engagement. So I really ask the council to strengthen the requirements, particularly around written and online outreach efforts, to make sure applicants have to reach a really broader array of stakeholders. And finally, I would really like to see that the requirements for documentation get a little stronger. If we really want to know if this new process is truly working and resulting in better quality engagement, then we need to require actual reporting on the actual number of people who are participating in the project. Number of people who are responding to surveys, who are calling the hotlines or clicking through to the websites are all documentation that people could provide. Please do what you can to ensure that a new design process really engages the community and that we take the opportunity to learn from data if this new process is actually working. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Brooke. Aaron House, Aaron, and then Joyce Glasgow, and then Angela Compton.
Good evening again, council members. My name is Aaron House, and I'm testifying on behalf of Seattle for Everyone. We are very pleased to see design review legislation move forward. Reform of the design review process is identified as a highest impact HALA recommendation and is an aspect of HALA on which our coalition partners in affordable housing and for-profit development are especially aligned. Many of our coalition partners have ample firsthand experience with the impacts of Seattle's current design review process and the time and cost of building homes, and we urge the council to prioritize housing affordability as a primary goal for this legislation. We believe that some improvements could be made in order for the program to support the goals and vision of HALA. We support the proposal to allow affordable housing projects with public funding to be reviewed through the administrative process, and we recommend that SDCI staff be allowed to make departures for affordable housing projects under administrative review. We also recommend that the council explore the following. Funding for a robust training program that includes instruction on the goals and vision of the HALA recommendations to equip board members and staff with baseline information to consider the impact of the decisions on housing costs. Incentives to ensure regular participation of board members so that housing projects don't suffer in their timelines based on the failure of boards to achieve a quorum. And incentives for deep green building standards to advance sustainability goals for affordable and market rate housing development. We understand that many of the process details of the revised program will be developed in the coming months, and we're eager to assist in shaping the program to ensure that the revisions support the goals of HALA. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. Joyce? Joyce, and then Angela Compton, and then Al Levine.
I agree with what the previous speaker said about how important it is that you get the word out that there are meetings about design reviews, because in my neighborhood, Capitol Hill, there's a lot of people that don't even know what's going on, that there are plans for big buildings or to change the landscape in some way, and people don't even know about it, so they can't even go and talk about it. Then after it happens, they're just stuck looking at what they got. And also, I don't know where this comes into it, but we had an instance up in Capitol Hill where the City People's Mercantile used to be on 15. And what happened was Walgreens bought the building, and they didn't tear it down. They kept the bones of the building, and because they did not have to go through a design review like anybody else would who was doing a building. And so they were trying to get away with doing all kinds of crazy things, like having the big lit up Walgreens sign on the outside and large lights in the parking lot right next to residences, and trucks that would go in the alley to deliver stuff in the middle of the night right next to these Ann Holt apartments. And if it wasn't for the people in the Ann Holt apartments that lawyered up and brought a case against them, that place would have been destroyed and be lit up all night long with all kinds of trucks and no separation from the neighbors. And so how do you take care of that? Is there a law now that says it doesn't matter whether you're using an existing building or building a new one, you still have to go through a design review?
Thank you, Joyce.
Can you answer that question?
We will, if you like, we'll make sure to get your contact information afterwards, because all you've got here is your zip code, and we'll follow back up. Thank you. Angela Compton. Angela, you're going to be followed by Al Levine, and then Sarah Jane Siegfried.
Hi guys, thank you again for having us today. My name is Angela Compton. I'm here today to offer support for design review reform legislation on behalf of FutureWise, a statewide organization that works to prevent sprawl in order to protect Washington's resources and ensure that our urban areas are livable for everyone. This legislation addresses one of the most important, yet often overlooked causes of housing shortage. That's delay. As the saying goes, time is money. And by the city's estimate, each month of delay costs roughly as much as building an entire unit. By streamlining the design review process, by allowing affordable housing projects, as well as some smaller projects, to go through the administrative review, we will see more homes to Seattle, especially for those who need them, with less delay. We would also like to recommend funding for a robust training program for design review board members and city staff that includes information on how their decisions affect housing affordability. We are pleased to see the design review reform legislation move forward, and we urge you to prioritize the housing affordability goals in this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. Al?
Well, I was going to talk about risk and how developers look at projects, and I want to say I strongly support revising the design review process. I was a member of the Hollow Work Group that focused on that, and I urge the council to look at the comments that Sightline has made regarding this series of recommendations. But, you know, contrary to a lot of what's been said, developers look at how much money they can make, but they're way more worried about how much money they can lose. And risk is a huge factor that they can mitigate, they can understand for interest costs, construction costs, market changes. But the entitlement risk that we've introduced with design review as it's been carried out in the city is a significant cost and factor, and it's actually producing less housing units than we would get if that became way more predictable. And my only concern with this proposal is I don't think there's enough predictability. I think community input is great, but there needs to be a schedule and an understanding, and not, as has already been said, missed meetings, delayed decisions, and everything else that's happened. And I know the proposal addresses a lot of this, but I think it's really important that this stuff be locked down and developers understand how long the process is going to take. Because when they go to finance their buildings, that's what the people who are financing these buildings are going to ask. Are you really going to get your permits? Are you going to be hung up on some argument about parking or use, which it's obvious a lot of people don't understand the purpose of design review. We have zoning, we have land use, we have building codes. That's where a lot of this stuff comes in. And so I just carry on, but I think make sure you get it right this time, because it's, as you know, it's really difficult to change. Thanks.
Sarah Jane, you're going to be followed by Toby Thaler, and then Matt Hutchins, and then Patrick Taylor.
I'm Sarah Jane Siegfried. I live in Lake City and was involved for a couple of years in the Lake City Urban Design Framework process. It takes time for neighborhoods to be involved in these processes, and We think that the design that came out of that was really pretty robust and certainly represented well the community. Now, the final section of the HALA, if anybody wants to go back and look at the document, it's called More Innovation. And what it really should have been called is Make Our Job Easier. It's the developers who wrote it and the developers who are saying, just get rid of all this neighborhood input stuff. We don't have time for that. It causes risk, which is true. But make no mistake, this is about for-profit, market-rate housing. It's not about affordable housing whatsoever. In fact, I question whether the HALA is about affordable housing at all, because now that everybody is rejecting the inclusionary part and paying the fee, you've got the city matching 3-to-1, whatever the fee is. So 3/4 of whatever we're getting for affordable housing is tax money that we're all paying. So it's not the developers that are giving us any affordable housing whatsoever. And in fact, when they kick it over to the public process and the city has to do it and put out an RFP, and then the nonprofits have to assemble the financing, which takes about a year, it's 4 years down the line before there is any affordable housing. So the delay is back to you guys when you said, oh, never mind the inclusionary part, the mandatory piece. That's where the delay is. It's not this little bit of inconvenience of the design review process. The community deserves to have a place at the table. That's all we're asking for. We're not opposed to growth. We just want to help shape it and have a say.
Thank you, Sarah. Toby, and then Matt Hutchins.
Hi, Toby Thaler, live in Fremont, been through many design reviews. I read many of the comments of the for-profit developers who complain about this being a cost issue, risk, etc. That's not speaking to the whole point of design review, which is to make for a better, more livable community. The AIA in particular pointed out how poorly defined some of the provisions were, especially the outreach. The way it's drafted is a mess, and that is in part because you didn't include all the stakeholders, the impacted people, for a year and a half between when you stopped outreach in fall of 2015 and then dropped this on us on the same day as the MHAEIS. As far as dealing with projects through design review and as a neighborhood person, the big projects aren't the problem. They come in and they talk to the neighborhood, they talk to the neighbors, they deal with the neighbors, they negotiate what's going to happen, they respond to the design review board, and we get a better project. The problem is in the low-rise 1, 2, 3. That's where we have impacts because the existing scale of housing is going to create edge effects, especially as you raise the density, and that leads to the whole point of an EIS and the segmentation that you're doing. If you don't incorporate design review into the whole process of how you, and the holistic process of reviewing projects, design review is in part to mitigate for the impacts of the increased density. Now you're going to change this process at the same time as you have an EIS over here that you're trying to finish that's going to say design review solves the problems. Doesn't happen. You need to have honest engagement, include people who are affected by these projects in the community. Thank you.
Matt Hutchins, and then Patrick Taylor.
I would like to apply just a simple litmus test to whether our city can maintain its vibrancy, and diversity, and resiliency. It's whether or not my own kid is going to be able to live in the neighborhood I live in. Right now, the answer is no, and that is because we're providing way less housing than we have in terms of demand. Does design review help in this sort of fundamental character about the livability of the city? And the answer is no, it doesn't even address it's addressing kind of the fringe of, what color the siding is. It is not a proponent for increasing housing. It's not a proponent for increasing livability. We see that, or affordability. It is long, difficult, Byzantine, arbitrary, and ultimately it's very costly. There's a little project on a single lot in West Seattle where they've gone through 2 stages of design review, and they put the project back on market and they've added $1 million, because $1 million is the price of how difficult it is to get design review, to get that entitlement. It's worth $1 million to another developer to have an entitled property that's gone through design review. Now, that cost doesn't really get passed through to the developer, it gets passed through to the residents and the people that are going to live there. Ultimately, I'd love to see a higher threshold, more missing middle projects, limit the meetings, and predictable outcomes. Because I want a city that is diverse, livable, affordable, that my own kid can live in.
Patrick's going to be followed by Renee McCoy and then Bill Rump.
Hi, my name is Patrick Taylor. I am a designer and architecture firm in Seattle working on a variety of housing projects in the city. And while I fully support the Hall recommendation to reform the design review process in order to streamline permitting for housing, I cannot support the reforms as written. As far as I can tell, the proposed reforms will actually be a step backwards and lead to greater delays while not producing better results. As a designer, I've watched many projects, both for the firms which I've worked and those of other firms move through design review. For the added time and cost, I've seen little result. Designs are not improved in proportion to the cost. Buildings are dumbed down by committee. Citizens rarely show up to provide actionable feedback. Rather, they simply complain about the fact that the development's happening, that there's not enough parking, or that the housing will be for the wrong kind of people. I've watched a project proposed in my neighborhood at a vacant trash room lot in Othello. Get rejected at EDG on flimsy grounds. Anything would be better than the empty vacant lot, but the project was nitpicked and will have to come back for a second meeting. For one of my own projects, I've been waiting a month for the planner's report that I need to move forward. This is not the planner's fault, but it needs supervisor sign-off, and the supervisor is too backed up. These delays have costs and lead to less new housing in the middle of a housing shortage that is hurting people in the city. Design review is broken and needs reform, and this is not the answer. It needs to be streamlined so it serves the citizens of Seattle, leads to higher quality design, and does not cause the delays and extra costs that it currently does. As for how to move forward, I recommend that you heed the advice of Sightline and Seattle for Everyone in their thoughtful comments. They provided a reasonable and well-thought-out approach. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Okay, thank you, Renee. Bill Rump. Bill, you're going to be followed by Tawny Bates and then Martin Kaplan.
Bill Rump, I'm the president for Mercy Housing Northwest. We're a nonprofit affordable housing developer, and I wanted to just talk about my experience with our latest project, Mercy Othello Plaza. Actually, both of you have toured it, so anyway, I won't go into detail on that. We opened applications for 3 weeks and received 2,000 applications for 108 apartments, so there's a huge need. We came to design review, again, 100% affordable, 2/3 were 2-bedroom and larger, family-size apartments, huge podium-level deck with playground. We exceeded the city and state green standards. We didn't get through design review. We sort of got a derogatory comment from one of the architects, a general statement about affordable housing. He's still on the board, and they liked the building, but they wanted the back alley, the backside, to be more modulated. And so we came back. I mean, there were high stakes for not having a delay, so we spent $100,000 modulating the back alley. One of the other architects on the board, turns out he's designing a townhouse across the street. So my recommendations for the design review is, I really am in favor of the outreach. We are doing a project now in Mount Baker. We do have some neighborhood concerns. We've added additional meetings. That interaction is positive, but there has to be this balance of what the impact is on cost. And the other element I just want to mention in this, I think that's backwards about in the hybrid, is having the staff review at the beginning and the design review after you've spent a lot of money, and it's really hard to make changes. I think it should be the total reverse, because it's the early stages when that interaction really is possible and lead to change. Thank you.
Tawny, you're going to be followed by Martin Kaplan and then Michelle O'Connell.
I don't have very good light here, but I'll give it a show. My name's Tawny Bates. I live within about 6 buildings going through design review currently. I think the process is not perfect. There's certainly fixes that need to be made, but please halt the changes that you're currently proposing. Propose changes that demonstrate real improvements in design review. One of the proposed changes requires advance outreach and meetings as a part of collecting neighborhood input by the developers. These meetings between developers and residents, they sound like a good idea in theory, but the results are supposed to be self-reported back to DCI by the developers. Self-reporting is an inappropriate method to collect input. It's basically biased by nature when it's conducted and delivered by the developer. The other thing is these meetings sound very good between the developer and the neighborhoods, but in my direct experience, they're extremely stressful for both sides. The residents come in ignorant of the process. There's not enough city materials to tell them what's going on. The developer arrives with architects, owners, and legal staff. They know the codes and the loopholes. Non-design review meetings are messy, they're contentious. You need a design review board of some kind for a successful process. The design review board acts as a sort of impartial mediator. They really do. They bring the city, the neighbors, and the developer together to clarify and resolve differences in what I felt like was the only safe, neutral location. The meetings reduce the imbalance in power between the developers and the residents, therefore enhancing the equity of the whole relationship. The process is public, it's online, it's transparent. Those things work for it. So improve on the process. We need to preserve design review for all medium and large projects, including urban villages. In my experience, better buildings are generally the result and happier neighbors. I didn't love the outcome of my project, but I'm intensely grateful there was a process to use to talk about it. Thank you. Improve design review, don't reduce it.
Thank you. Martin? Martin, you're going to be followed by Michelle O'Connell and then Mark Foltz.
Hi again, Martin Kaplan, architect, and I'm a member of the Queen Anne Community Council and chair of our Queen Anne Land Use Review Committee. We're probably the oldest land use review committee in the city. We're over 40 years old, and we invite projects in. We do the hard work first. We negotiate on behalf of the community. Projects go into design review, and we go in and advocate for departures, for all kinds of different things, and it's a pretty smooth process. I've personally helped other neighborhoods set up their lurks. Tweaking the design review program for efficiencies is important over time. However, doing so under the guise of affordability has become a popular saying, but a serious distraction without merit. As an architect with consistent contact with DR since the very beginning, I can tell you that the efficiencies are welcome, but will not result in a penny less rent or a penny less purchase price. Rent and sales value are determined by the marketplace and have no connection to construction costs and permitting time. Time issues and permitting time, they only cause an impact to the pro forma and the profit. One will not charge less rent than their neighbor. In addition, these projects that suffer delay are often associated with applicants who disregard DRB input, sidestep public engagement, and advance projects that often are unsuited to their surroundings. Raising thresholds is antithetical to improving the program and completely misses the value of DR. The most egregious offenders of community respect deserving serious DR are the smallest projects, with limited commitments to design, material quality, value, and commitments to their neighbors. The public engagement model works and must be clearly defined, broadened, and upheld without compromise.
Thank you, Mark.
Am I done?
Yes.
Already? Oh, geez, okay.
It appears you have some written comments if you'd like to leave those with us.
I will do that. You get the gist.
Michelle O'Connell. Michelle, you're going to be followed by Mark Foltz and then Clifton.
I need to give a caveat in that I am in the insurance industry. I don't do construction risk, but I do
favorites. This is not actually part of the planning process, but I highly suggest that part of the planning process involves looking at the limits of insurance of all those parties involved in construction. I say this from experience. I am one of 3 buildings that just got a lawsuit approved by the builders of Campus. If you know the Campus building, it's quite ugly, but it's right there on Elliott on a very sensitive hill. There's a lot of sensitive hills all over Queen Anne, but the construction company and the developer only carried $1 million of liability. As a person that doesn't own a business, I have double that. So three of our buildings were able to join a lawsuit to get that $1 million limit for our repairs. Another building that didn't want to join our lawsuit because they had even worse issues, their elevator wouldn't even go up, decide not to join the lawsuit, they're out. They don't have any recourse, unless they got a really smart lawyer. It should be part of the Department of Construction inspections to make sure that these projects are adequately insured. It's unconscionable to only have $1 million limit. For a project like that, you should have a minimum of $10 million. So when they do cause damage to neighboring buildings, they are fully covered. It's just unconscionable, and that should be part of the Department of Construction inspections, ongoing, to make sure they have insurance with an A-rated carrier and they keep that insurance in place.
Thank you, Michelle. That's a good look. Mark Foltz. Mark, you're going to be followed by Linda Clifton and then John Coylo.
Hello again. I'm Mark Foltz. I'm a Wallingford homeowner and member of Welcoming Wallingford. I do care a lot about the buildings that go up in my neighborhood and attended several design review meetings. However, it's clear that most people are there to argue about parking and zoning, and the process just simply makes it harder to build new housing the city desperately needs. In the worst case, a small group of people, maybe with some money, can block the project from proceeding, as we've seen on the Capitol Hill TOD project and elsewhere. So I do support the recommended changes to streamline design review. I think it is important to solicit community input, but in a way that doesn't introduce delays and risk into the process. I'd like the committee to support amendments 4A and 4B to help tilt developer incentives towards on-site performance for MHAR. Finally, on the outreach part, I second a lot of comments by Brooke Broad. I think developers should be required to use all means of outreach, including online, in-person, and written materials. I'd also like to see them work with community groups to help improve their engagement process, particularly in underserved groups and groups that may not be familiar with a lot of the technical stuff around design review. And if they do work with those community groups, I'd like them to pay them for their time. Community stuff isn't free. Finally, one thing I'd like to see is to work on some technology. So there's an excellent website, Seattle in Progress, where you can see all projects in process. If people could leave online comments there, I think that would be a great lightweight way to improve community engagement around upcoming projects. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mark. Linda? Linda, as you make your way down, John Coylo and then John Lisbon will follow Linda. And Linda, you take us to the halfway mark.
Okay, thank you. Linda Clifton. I live in Fremont. I am a member of the Fremont Neighborhood Council, although I don't speak for the council on this issue. I'm speaking for myself. I do want to share with you that as a member of the council, we've participated a number of times in advance outreach on design review on a number of buildings. And our experience is that that kind of communication with the developers makes for better buildings over and over and over. In one case, we were able to persuade the developer to add back some family size units, when originally they had decided they wouldn't put them in after all. In another case, the whole design of the building became more aesthetically pleasing, but what was really interesting, and this speaks to what the Mercy Housing spokesperson said, this was a building that was going to house 71 formerly homeless individuals. And the neighborhood was kind of wary of what kind of relationship that would be. But the process of dealing with the developers helped us understand that they really wanted to be a good neighbor building, and helped us understand what supports they would give to the residents that would come in. And that's been a really positive experience in most ways for the people living in the new building and for the people who live near it. So in terms of the proposals, I really support good early outreach, but I also want to speak to the need for outreach and for design review on those smaller projects in the LR1, LR2, LR3. Those are areas, for instance, where we live in our urban village, where we're going to have real impacts as Holland goes into place. And we're going to need help in making sure those buildings really fit on our small streets and with our lack of other amenities like parks and air and gardens. Thank you.
John? John, maybe we talk about John Lisbon, if he's still here, and then Nikki, Olivier, Helen.
I'm not greatly erudite on this issue, but it seems like the word reform means weaken as far as it's an Orwellian use of language. And it seems to me that expediting is fine, but to weaken in the review would be a very bad idea. So that's all I have to say on it.
Thank you, John. John. Sorry I didn't see you in the back. No, next John. Sorry. Sorry, John. Other John. I'm getting a little punchy here as we get to the 3-hour mark. I apologize.
That's all right, it was the same thing in camp.
John.
How many Johns there were?
John L.
How do I do this? Okay. So I'm John Lisbon, and I represent Seattle Fair Growth. I am very disappointed in the so-called improvements of the design review process, but I'm not very surprised. I've seen the city council, the city cut ties with the community council. I've seen the HALA committee being comprised of over 65% developer interests. And I've seen the HALA Grand Bargain being a dead giveaway for developers, where downtown developers have a performance fee as low as 2% in exchange for building higher. So why should I be surprised that 30% of housing will no longer be subject to design review? Is anybody here surprised about that? As a business owner, I know there has to be a really good balance between stakeholders, between shareholders, between employees, and between clients. And I think as far as land use issues, it's really important to have a good balance between the city, between developer interests, and between the community and the citizens. So that's all we're asking for, is for our voice to be listened to. Thank you.
Thank you. Nikki, you're going to be followed by Jan Katzenberger, and then David. Morning? I'm going to guess that's morning.
Good evening, council members. Thank you for the opportunity to comment, and thanks to everybody for sticking around. Look at this civic engagement. So have them back for us. So I am from the Housing Development Consortium. We are a nonprofit membership organization of 150 other organizations that are all dedicated to the vision that everyone deserves to live in a safe, healthy, and affordable home in a community of opportunity. I wanted to echo the comments that were already made by folks from Seattle for Everyone and from FutureWise, and just say that we're pleased to see this legislation move forward. We urge the council to particularly prioritize housing affordability goals for this legislation, and we support the proposal to allow affordable housing projects with public funding to be reviewed through the administrative process to reduce permit review times, and recommend that SCCI staff be allowed to make departures for affordable housing projects under administrative review. I'd like to thank Bill Rump for the story that he shared about Marcia Fellow Plaza, and just say that that story story is not an aberration when it comes to the experience of folks trying to build affordable homes in our city. It's one that many of our member organizations could tell you about multiple of their buildings. So just want to kind of bring attention back to the story that he shared. Thanks.
Thank you. Jan, and then David, and then Ryan Kenowitz.
Thank you. And first, let me applaud your stamina that you've been able to sit here so long. And I want to genuinely thank the folks from Seattle Department of Construction and Inspections for even proposing improving community dialogue and making the program more transparent and accessible to the public. So thank you very much for that. Some of our concerns on some of the proposals is that the changes would not focus design review on development projects most likely to influence the character of residential neighborhoods, and that there is no evidence presented that these changes would reduce the cost of building housing, as some of the other folks have mentioned. So I represent the Baker Street Community Group, and what we're asking for is that public notification and subsequent comment periods be required, be standardized, and be enforceable. Developers should not be able to determine for themselves what constitutes neighborhood outreach. And this is in line with the idea of predictability for developers. If they know what the standards are, it makes it easier for them to follow. We do reject the proposal to exclude from review projects under 10,000 square feet, just out of hand. That would effectively discontinue review for most L1 zone projects, and we reject the proposal to discontinue design review for 3 or more townhouses on a parcel or row house development projects. We would also like to see lot boundary adjustments become type 2 decisions, and that is subject to hearing examiner appeal. The public must be allowed comment on these decisions as they have the potential to affect issues such as emergency vehicle access, neighbor privacy, amenity requirements, and exceptional tree removal. We would like to see parent lot zoning applied to development sites that result from lot boundary adjustments and short plat subdivisions. Thank you. God, I did it in under 2 minutes.
David, you're going to be followed by Ryan Lukenowitz.
I'd also like to thank.
Do you mind if I raise the mic just a little bit? I think it might make it easier to hear.
Like Jan, I'd also like to thank the council person and her staff for being here this late and taking our public comments. It's all part of the Seattle process, and I think that's the thing that's probably missing the most in this proposal is the public process. Say, for example, I'm going to ask the people in this room to raise their hand, except the last 3 rows, if you think it's a good idea to stop the review of townhouses and row houses in the city. Except the last 3 rows. What I'm trying to demonstrate is that within this council bill, it allows the developer to basically devise their own outreach program. They can say, I want to deal with this neighborhood, but not that group over there because they're right next to the property. So we've got to take out any exclusionary language, and I've also made some copies of the parts of the proposal for your reference where that is identified. I also kind of wonder, in which city are you allowed to reduce the code requirements just for the sake of making things go faster? And by the way, as written in the SDCI documents, 1/3 of the time to do review is in the hands of the developer themselves. So 2/3 by the SDCI, 1/3 by the developer. Of course, both sides need time to review it. They got to do their job, but we can't say, hey, let's cut back in the codes. Let's forget about the row houses and townhouses because we want to get done faster. That's not a good practice. So basically, we took a survey on the last day. We have over 110 people who responded in one day period. We'd like to see the council take some more time, look at the caveats, look at the loopholes, so we're not looking at this again a year from now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dave. Ryan, you're going to be followed by Walt Saveland and then Janine Reese.
opportunity to speak tonight. My name is Ryan Lujanowitz. I'm a Seattle native, attended high school here as well as went to the University of Washington where I studied construction management. I now work for a small developer builder. One of our goals is to bring urban infill to a city that desperately needs it. One such of those projects is in Columbia City, where we actually own the land. The project is just under 12,000 square feet, and as such is subject to streamlined design review. The proposal in front of us today is to eliminate streamlined design review, which is a huge advantage to us in bringing that actual product to market. I urge you to reconsider eliminating streamlined design review. A lot of people have quoted the Sightline article tonight, and with my remaining time, I want to speak to some of the points that I find most applicable here. The proposal to eliminate streamlined design review would be a step backward. It has been working well for modest projects, and the city should use it for the lowest tier of design review. The proposed hybrid process is untested and unlikely to improve timelines or predictability at all. It should be dropped. Additionally, I agree with the Sightline article in regards to upping the thresholds for design review. The minimum should be 15,000 square feet. We're experiencing a housing crisis here. We need to bring product to market. We need to do it thoughtfully and carefully, but the current proposal puts a stranglehold on people like my ability to do so. Thank you.
Walt? Walt, you're going to be followed by Janine Reese and then David Ward.
It's pretty high for me. While applauding those challenging so-called upzoning proposed here, my own focus is on proposal to simplify the thresholds for requiring a full design review. The director's report says that these would reduce the number of projects required to go through the full design review, instead allowing a large proportion of projects to go through an administrative design review with neither a public meeting nor review board participation. The proposal is to switch from a variety of thresholds based on use, units, and zoning to simple square footage thresholds. I'm here to vigorously challenge the removal of the apartment units from the design review thresholds. While square feet of floor area represent material dimensions of a proposed building, the number of apartments represents the human dimension. For example, let's compare a proposed development in the 2200 block of First Avenue with the most recent building on the block finished in 2013. Both buildings comprise 8 stories on city lots of about equal size. The existing building has 34 apartments, while the proposed one has been designed with 66 units, nearly twice as many. The existing building features many floor-to-ceiling windows with dramatic skyline views, while the 66-unit proposal includes a number of windowless bedrooms. This lack of bedroom windows is one of the reasons for the review board sending the proposal back to the drawing boards. Elsewhere in Seattle, sometime in the future where only square feet count, there might not even be a review board present to protect vigorously our interests. For us to avoid an epidemic of windowless bedrooms in coming years, later evolving into a new generation of tenements, we need to protect the relative autonomy and rigor of review boards. Thank you.
Janine? And then David Ward.
I urge the council to put the brakes on any legislation to change design review. Your proposed changes are poorly worded, unclear. The time frame given to the public to try and comprehend these changes is far from adequate. In short, your proposal is a half-baked mess. The public deserves clear and concise legislation that is comprehensible to those who must read, digest, and comply with such rules. Sloppy codes makes for sloppy government. If you do anything at all, you should embrace, as some of the city staff have done, increasing the requirements for design review rather than decreasing them. Avoiding delays of projects, which may be your motivation, generally, is generally caused by inadequate staffing at DCI. And inadequate staffing of city reps allocated to the design review process. Fix city understaffing and you'll speed up construction. Don't change the design review process.
David, you're going to be followed by John Zoshik and Susanna Lynn.
I would recommend that the thresholds for design review not be changed. As other people have said, it's often the smaller projects which create the most problems and will create the most problems in those neighborhoods for many decades. Delay in building construction is blamed on design review, but from my looking at permitting timelines from earlier 2000s and more recently, the delays are more from a shortage of SDI staff than they are from design review. Also, it's critical to make the outreach obligatory before the initial design review stage. This will shorten the time, not lengthen it, because the developers will get input from the community, such as from land use review committees. Specifically to increase outreach, there should be notice on every building, should be obligatory. There should be mailings within a 1,000-foot radius of all the projects. There should be posted on next door in the neighborhood that the project is going to be in to get greatest outreach. And notice should be on the neighborhood blog also. That would give the greatest amount of knowledge of the project. There should be a project website or webpage so that people can go and find out about the project, but that should not be considered outreach by itself, because people will never know about it, they won't find it unless they know about it. And methods that allow the developer owner to self-select who knows about the project should not be accepted, such as interviews with community leaders. And in other words, outreach should contact the greatest number of people who live in the vicinity of the project and give them as much knowledge of the project as possible. The further you get from these two elements, the greatest number of people and the greatest knowledge and input, the less it should be considered outreach.
Thank you, David.
And just one last quick comment. Don't give away city property to for-profit developers. Use that infill for profit and affordable housing.
John, you're going to be followed by Susanna Lynn and then Bonnie Williams.
Hey, my name's John Zoshak. I'm a renter on Capitol Hill. I came to support the council's efforts to reform the design review process. Specifically, I'd like to mention my support for Amendment 9C. Elimination of hybrid review and increase in the square footage thresholds will be part of a larger solution towards affordable housing in Seattle. For the square footage recommendation specifically, I'd point to Sightline's comment letter, which I thought was pretty reasonable. More importantly, I think this is part of a larger conversation around affordable housing in the city. I strongly believe the council should ask of every policy, are we behaving in a way that is appropriate to an affordable housing crisis? And I believe that this legislation is a yes if Amendment 9C is added. And then one last point I'd like to make. The reason why I came here tonight is I love Seattle. Seattle was the first place I ever got to hold my husband's hand in the street. I've never felt such acceptance and warmth from the community. It breaks my heart to think that there might be other queer people out there that can't afford, that aren't as fortunate as I am and can't afford to live in Capitol Hill, and that they would have to live in a hostile environment otherwise. So I would like to thank my fellow Seattleites for being so amazing. And that's all. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Susanna.
Sorry. Okay, I'm Susanna Lynn. I'm a member of Seattle for Growth, but also the Wallingford Community Council. I've testified a lot. Out of everything, this is one of the things that bothers me the most, because this is basically saying to a lot of people, we don't want to hear your voice. And it's saying to developers, do what you want. And it really bothers me that we'll take that away. Well, a lot of what happens, I've been to a lot of design review meetings, and a lot of what happens is the neighbors are there trying to get the developers to follow the rules, the building codes, because there's this lovely thing called departures, where the developers can come and ask for permission to not follow the building codes. And now you want that to happen outside of the public view, which is very upsetting. For example, I went to a design review that had so it was a low-rise zone abutting a single-family house that had a backyard cottage. The picture that the developer came with didn't even show that that structure was a backyard cottage. It could have been a shed. The developer wanted a departure, and the building would be so close to the backyard cottage that it could not open its egress window. These are the things that we need to be able to point out, okay? The developer also wanted to put the dumpsters for this 50-unit building right outside the window of that backyard cottage. These are the things that happen at these design review meetings. They're requesting departures, or they're just not thinking about the neighbors. They're thinking about their profits, they're thinking about maximizing square footage. Checks and balances is important for who we are. This is a progressive city. We should not be silencing people. We should keep the checks and balances. These buildings will be there for a very long time. Thank you.
Bonnie, you're going to be followed by Christy Tobin Presser, and then Matthew Albright.
Good evening. I'm from Wallingford, and I'm a Seattle native. And some of the comments that I have, you probably heard, but one way to speed the design process, the design review process, would be to hire more staff at the permitting for the permitting process, and also to create more design review boards, because I understand that the meeting time can cause delays because there aren't enough people staffing those boards to cover the growth right now. So there's a lag in those two areas, I believe. I am opposed to changing thresholds to 10,000 square feet because it creates loopholes for developers. And as has been brought out tonight, a lot of the smaller projects create the greatest number of problems in urban villages. And setbacks are really important. I mean, you can't really maintain a property. You can't paint. You can't put a ladder out there sometimes. If somebody wants to go lot line to lot line, I mean, these are the departures that sometimes come up, and these are very important for people to reduce the impacts. Also, this has been said before, but in the DEIS, design review was considered a mitigation tool. We don't have that many tools for neighborhoods anymore. Our public engagement process has not been very, authentic. And if you agree with Hala, fine. If you don't, you get disregarded. They want to dismiss your comments. So looking to the future, to think about urban village zone changes, L1, more L1, more L2, more L3. We need good design review for mitigation purposes and for livability in neighborhoods. Thank you.
Christy, you're going to be followed by Matthew Alvarez and then Irene Wall.
Good evening, I'm Christy Tobin Presser. I'm here on behalf of the West Seattle Junction Neighborhood Organization Land Use Committee. As most of us are aware, the Hala MHA proposals would result in significant changes to areas currently zoned single-family residential throughout the city. I can only speak to the details with respect to West Seattle Junction, but I think my comments are universally applicable. So in our neighborhood, over 20 blocks would be proposed to be rezoned to residential small lot, low-rise 1, low-rise 2, or low-rise 3. The draft environmental impact statement acknowledged that this would effectuate a significant change in character. The mitigation proposed, there are 3 aspects: upper level setbacks, facade modulation, and finally, and most importantly, design review and design guidelines. However, most of those aren't currently available for most low-rise. It seems only fair that in demanding that certain neighborhoods absorb the primary density for the benefit of the city, that those same neighborhoods should have an actual voice in how the changes look and feel. In other words, design review should be expanded for those areas, but unfortunately, the thresholds are proposed to be raised, meaning that there will be less available. We have heard a number of anecdotal stories, not surprisingly, mostly from developers, about delay occasioned by design review. But primarily, these anecdotes view neighborhood residents and community members as obstacles to be overcome rather than people whose lives are going to be dramatically impacted by the proposed changes. Slowing down development to allow the community to have a voice in shaping what their neighborhood looks like should be the minimum quid pro quo for the type of changes that are being proposed. There's something very unfair about just steamrolling over residents that made the neighborhoods what they are.
Matthew?
Hello, my name is Matthew L. Norris. I'm an architect and a former board member of the Downtown Design Review Board. And I'm here on behalf of AIA Seattle's Public Policy Board, which represents some 2,300 design professionals. AIA supports the goals for greater efficiency and predictability in the design review process, and we support the amendment to modify the project thresholds. This reserves the design review process for larger projects where we believe it will have the greatest impact. Removing smaller projects such as townhomes, we hope will allow the city to meet the HALA goals of increased affordable housing. But as design professionals, we care deeply about fostering good design, and would like to work with DCI on ways to ensure that the design is elevated for these smaller projects without the burden of the design review process. AIA Seattle does not support the proposed early community outreach requirement. This change conflicts with the stated goal of greater predictability and believes it will only create greater confusion among members of the public. We also believe that the stated requirement provides a very real opportunity for the public to protest any project they do not support, causing onerous legal claims and crippling delays for every project. We believe it is the city's responsibility, not that of the applicant, to achieve the appropriate level of public engagement. We strongly advocate for requiring applicant participation in a more clearly defined, city-led, early public outreach effort. We hope DCI will reconsider the community outreach requirement as stated to ensure a more predictable outcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Irene?
Hi, good evening, council members. Thanks for everything.
Hold on for 1 second, Irene. Your microphone is now just on. Go ahead.
Is it on now?
Now you are.
I can definitely hear myself now. I'm Irene Wall. I live in Finney Bridge. I've been there many years, member of the community council, also the co-chair of the city neighborhood council, neighborhood planning and land use committee. My comments tonight are principally my own. You've received a letter from the CNC, so I hope you will go back and review that. Yeah, I prepared comments here, but I have to say, I'm someone who looks at the Seattle Daily Business Journal every day, and I scan through all the city notices. And there isn't a day goes by that I don't see many notices for unit lot subdivisions and, proposals for development. I just don't see that we're slowing down any process here. The city is rapidly redeveloping, and I don't think design review is getting in the way. I also don't think that these reforms are necessarily going to make the development community very happy, and I have to say I agree with someone I heard tonight that say it's not going to produce the predictability that is desired. It simply means that the wait, instead of being a wait for getting an EDG meeting, it'll be a wait in a different line in the same hall to get to see a staff member for an administrative review. But principally, the problem here is that these reforms do not focus on design, character, and preserving the character of our neighborhoods. And getting the 10,000 square foot limit is really a problem here, and many others have spoken to it, but I think it's a fundamental problem. There is a bright spot here in the focus on community engagement, but there's some really big problems with it. And I just want to say, having read the director's report and the director's rule, this sentence just struck me. It says, while collaboration approach is encouraged, the applicant is not required to incorporate any specific community feedback into the project's design. If you can't come up with a better prescription for encouraging apathy and cynicism among neighbors about redevelopment in this city if you have that kind of an attitude. In other words, do community engagement, check the box, but you don't have to pay any attention to what you've heard. This is a problem that needs to be fixed.
Thank you, Irene. Steve Zemke. Steve, you're going to be followed by Laura Bernstein and then Richard Ellison.
So my name is Steve Zemke. I'm a member of the Seattle Urban Forestry Commission. I'm not speaking for them tonight as an individual. Also chair of TreePack and Friends of Seattle's Urban Forests. The issue before you is much larger than design review. The fact is that the city is not giving adequate protection to trees. It goes back to the 2009 interim tree ordinance. Some of that is changed in this language in the design review. That said, that the city's all for protecting trees unless it limits the development potential of a lot. And what the planners that have been on the Urban Forestry Commission said, they've seen no instance where those trees have really been protected in development projects that they've been working on. So you have a process that I think is failing the city in protecting trees, and you need to look at something different. The city needs to get something back for the trees being lost. They're not doing that now. People are basically being allowed to develop. The rush on here is to develop, to build more housing, but just as an instance, the Department of Construction and Inspections did not even notify or come to the Urban Forestry Commission and say, hey, we're discussing this design review process that affects exceptional trees. Do you have any comments? We only heard about it by accident here a couple of weeks ago. What I personally and what our organizations recommend is, and the Urban Forestry Commission has recommended this on the first, is that the city needs to track the loss of trees resulting by requiring an urban forestry canopy impact assessment for the development. This was recommended 3 years ago by the Urban Forestry Commission. It's not been acted on. The second thing is mandate replacement on and off site of all tree canopy loss or payment into the city tree maintenance and replacement and maintenance fund. This is what Portland, Oregon does. This is what Woodinville does. These are things I think that you need to look at if you're seriously concerned about the impact on tree loss as a result of the process that you're dealing with. I will submit to you, more information and would urge you to read it because, as everybody knows, this is not a simple ordinance. It's some 80 pages long.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you. Laura, you're going to be followed by Richard Ellison.
So I have gone to many design review meetings. I've gone to the Special Review District and International District. I've gone to the downtown review meetings. I've gone to the ones in the U District. I've gone to the ones related to the Madison Valley PCC. And the pattern that I see is we're going to throw everything at the wall and see what sticks so we can stop this project. We're going to bring up anything we can bring up and see if we can fit it within this bulk lake scale definition. But we really are upset about the alley or the tower spacing or other things. And we're going to use this design review process as a way to get at these other issues that we're upset about. And so it's being abused and misused. And for example, at the Escala design review, which I went to about 4 of them, there's 2 different projects across the alley, there was testimony. First of all, it was a bunch of folks that were able to hire people to represent them. And they were bringing testimony from doctors and lawyers and other folks, and they had Sugar the dog, who was going to lose his sunlight, and that was the reason why they wanted the angle of the building to be even more shaved off so there would be light for Sugar the dog. And this is what's going on in these meetings. And I've been to meetings that were productive, but many of the meetings I've been to, the Madison Valley one has been going on for years. That project's been delayed for 2, 3, 4 years. And those, when it's finally done, it's not going to make the rents cheaper for the people that are running the building. It's not going to make the rents cheaper for PCC. It actually might mean that that building doesn't even ever get built. And when we look at this across the whole city and we multiply those delays over and over and over again across all the projects in the city, what we add up to is thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars of more rent. And if you're angry about capitalism, you're angry that there's a renting class and a landowning class, and you're part of that landowning class, and you want to overthrow that process, go give to the tenants union. Go support renters' rights. If you're angry about that and you're angry at developers and you're angry at the way our system is set up, that's great. But don't use design review as a proxy to fight capitalism.
Thank you. Richard, you're going to be followed by Mike Motortizer.
Hello, my name is Richard Ellison. I'm a Wedgwood homeowner and I'm a biologist. My comments focus a lot on the tree canopy issue, which has been brought up as well. I think part of it comes down to that the design review is supposed to act as kind of a mitigation between the community and the developers, and it really has slowed down things, but it's not being very effective for the community as well. The green factor, which is so laid upon as a mitigation for the loss of trees, is not working. If you look at the low-rise, the mid-rise, and commercial development in the city right now, it's just turning into cement walls, lot line to lot line. So to speed up the process through this modification design view process isn't solving the problem of trying to save trees. There's been a suggestion that maybe we need to do some mapping of the loss of the canopy. Perhaps we need to put more money into a tree canopy fund. These are good ideas. We should support. These are the minimum things that should be going on right now. The city has been avoiding really dealing with the tree issue. As a member of the Urban Forest Task Force under Jan Drago, this is an old beaten horse. And the city has been delaying updating its tree protection ordinance for 8 years. DCI basically is saying, give us the keys. We are the fox in the henhouse, and we like it. Don't disrupt us. And now you're saying, give this fox more power. If you want to have good direction for the planning staff, then you need to lay out everything for them. If you want to save a tree, then you have to provide incentives to the developers. The developers aren't taking these incentives you're providing for them right now. You can see that the loss of all the trees in the new development. What do we get out of this for ourselves? For a quality of living issue. This rush to build is we're building a city that's going to become less and less livable. It may look good on paper, it may have a lot of money coming, flushing through it, but for us to live in the city, we talk about, oh, we want our kids to live in the same community. Well, who knows what it's going to be like.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you very much.
Mike, you're the last person who signed up to give public comment. If there's anybody else who hadn't had a chance to sign in, please line up behind Mike at the mic.
Hello, I am for housing, I'm for affordability, and I'm for livability. I'm definitely against raising thresholds for design review. I don't think that's going to help either affordability or livability. Everybody in my neighborhood in the Central District agrees that the townhouse projects that slip in underneath these thresholds are the ugliest buildings in town. And they sure as hell aren't affordable, and they sure as hell aren't adding any livability to our neighborhood. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jill Kerfurst. I live in Seattle and work in Seattle, and I've served on the design review board for over 4.25 years. And I've worked here since before we had a design review board. I'm opposed to the changes that you are considering for a number of reasons. I'm also one of those evil developers that's putting up those mid-rise and high-rise projects with market rate housing. So you can all be mad at me, but I will just say that from a developer standpoint, the predictability of the design review board process is actually important to us. Before we had design review board, there were a lot more appeals of projects, and an appeal is even more unpredictable and riskier to a project because you've actually invested that much more. So what you want, the purpose of design review board is to engage the public early. If government at this point, the council, is feeling like we are not doing a good enough job at doing that, then I would urge you to staff up within SDCI and help your planners and their staff get the public more engaged earlier on. The early design guidance meeting is critical to letting the developers hear what is most important to the neighborhood. A good design review board, and we have some in the city that are very good and other boards that are not as well trained does an excellent job of taking that input, knowing what the codes and reasons behind them are, and applying it. And other boards go in all sorts of different directions. They're completely unpredictable. It actually scares developers away from certain neighborhoods because of that. So I would just encourage you to have more community input, but not by pushing that back onto the private sector. There is a reason why government works to do that, and you guys are the best ones through your agencies to do that.
Thank you, Jill.
Hi, my name's Ken Norman. I'm a Greenwood resident. I've seen Councilmember O'Brien at a number of Queen Anne and Finney meetings. I just have a couple quick comments. One, I just want people in the room to remember that the name of the agency is the Department of Construction. Now, if you're in charge of design and accommodating neighborhoods and protecting trees and everything else that makes Seattle livable, building things into it needs a little more consideration than just, we want to build stuff. That's the bottom line that's the MO of the agency. So if we want to build stuff, then you need to listen to the rest of us. So maybe they shouldn't be the final arbiter of whether stuff gets built in the first place. That might be something worth to think about. Secondly, as comments were made by Rich and Steve Zemke earlier, the outcome of these changes are going to mean that exceptional trees and exceptional green spaces are going to be the exception. They're not going to be treated like they should, which is protected and expanded. They're going to be treated like another obstacle that we can just administratively get rid of because a tree, just like a fish or a bird or anything else, doesn't have the ability to come down here and talk in front of a microphone. Finally, pass the tree ordinance. Cass Turnbull was putting that forward for years, and it still needs to get passed. 2009 is ridiculous. Get it passed, get the predictability that some of these developers have talked about, and get it in the system so that way we can all work together instead of having to have meetings like this where we're arguing about it. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't have anybody else lined up behind a microphone. So at this point, we will close what has been nearly a 4-hour public meeting.
I think 2 more minutes, we get us to 4 hours. Is there anybody?
We started 5 minutes late, so it'd be 7. I'm not sure. We want to say thank you to everybody for being here tonight. We do plan on taking up both of these issues again at our next Planning, Reuse, and Zoning Committee meeting. That's scheduled for Tuesday morning, September the 19th. City Council chambers, 9:30 in the morning. We've got a couple of other agenda items, but we are planning to take up the Uptown zoning changes and design review and potentially vote both of those out of committee next Tuesday morning. We welcome all the comments tonight, and we look forward to seeing you all at some point in a future meeting. Thank you. We are adjourned.